is one of the 3 elements that's required to submit for the competition. All right, so Lindsay and I both have mentioned about the competition and this process that we use, which is registering your intent to compete. You are not obligated to compete if you've registered, but this is our way of getting you on our radar, making sure that we share with you the links to the shared resource folder that has all kinds of great things in it I'll talk to in a minute. And it just makes sure that you're in the loop for all of the information related to the competition. So I'd encourage you to just scan the QR code. That will take you to the registration page, and you can fill that out. And now you're in the loop, all right? Also, I want to point out that in terms of eligibility, this competition is exclusively for members of the Temple University community. And by that, we mean all students, that's undergrad and grad students, alumni, faculty, and staff of Temple University. And that's not just from the Fox School of Business, but that's from all 17 schools and colleges within the entire university. It's unique in that it is closed to that Temple community, and it's also pretty prestigious in that for a competition of this size, it has one of the highest prize packages in the country. So there are other elements for being eligible in the competition. I won't go through all of these. Within that shared resources folder, we have a specific document that reviews all of the rules for eligibility. But you know, they're pretty basic. You can't have raised more than a certain amount of money. You can't have gross sales more than a certain amount of money. It has to be a for-profit business, but it can be a B Corp, it can be a social impact corp, but it be a not-for-profit business. All right. We encourage cross-discipline teams, etc. You can also, this question came up earlier today, you can also have members on your team that are from outside of the Temple community, even from other universities. So in past years, we've had some winning teams that were comprised of mixed teams between Temple students and students from other universities. The key to that is that the leader of the team has to be someone from the Temple University community, all right? All right. There are 2 tracks that you're going to compete in, an undergraduate track exclusively for teams made up of all undergraduates, and then an upper track, which consists of the graduate students, alumni, faculty, and staff. And if you have a team that has a mix from both tracks, you're automatically going to be competing in the upper track. Each track has its own set of cash prizes, as you can see on the chart. And then one of the 2 first place teams will be selected for the grand prize. And that's an additional $40,000 on top of their first place prize of $20,000. There are other really fantastic prizes that come along with this, not just the cash, but there are in-kind service packages that are offered by our various corporate sponsors that are for legal services, accounting services, marketing, technical support, all kinds of great things. Also included in that is our own IEI Accelerator program called Startup Studio that runs over the summer. That's a 9-week program for all of the finalists and other high potential selected teams to participate in a program that's really a great safety net, helping them through the summer to get better positioned to launch their business or to go out for additional funding for their business. And then there are these other 4 awards in addition to the prizes for each of the tracks. There's the Craft Favorite Award, a Digital Innovation Award, the Global Award, and the DEI Award. Both of those are going to be new this year for the competition. So there is a lot of value you can get from participating in this competition. The submission requirements are pretty simple. We ask for you to submit 3 elements. Now, this is the hardest of our competitions, the most challenging, but it's also, as I said, the most rewarding, all right? So we ask you to submit 3 things. One is a 1 to 2 page executive summary that covers all of the major elements of what would typically be in a business plan, and you'd summarize them and include that in your executive summary. The second one is a pitch deck. So that's a PowerPoint presentation, which you'll save in PDF format with notes included, and you'll submit that in for the judges to review that, as if you were going to be presenting. But to be clear, for the initial submission and the first round of judging, you won't have to give the pitch. You just have to submit the pitch deck that you would be using to give the pitch. And then the last element that's required is a 3-year financial projection. And a number of people, typically, non-business majors, find this to be the toughest part because it's the numbers, right? It's a P&L or an income statement showing your financial projections. But I do want to point out that one of our workshops that we're going to be giving later in this series is devoted entirely to the financial projections and how to look at and create your assumptions for those financial projections. So don't be intimidated by that if that's not your specialty. And then also, you have the ability to submit an optional 2-minute video. Think of it as a little bit like your elevator pitch that would describe your business, what's the problem you're solving, who you're solving it for, and what makes you different and special. That is not a requirement to submit. If you have a highly technical product, something that maybe is a little more difficult to explain, you might want to think about doing an optional video, but again, not required. All right, we talked about all of this great support that we provide to people that choose to participate in this program. One of them is this shared resources folder. It's going to include templates for you to use. So templates for this executive summary, for the financial plan, submission examples and other tips. It'll have, again, the outline of the eligibility policies, all of the workshop recordings and the slide decks from the workshops. It'll have the judges scoring rubric, and that's really important because we're going to be giving you the scorecard of what the judges will be using to score your ideas and your submissions. And then there'll be other important information in there as well. And you get the link to that shared folder when you register your intent to participate in the competition. Also, I want to encourage you, you really should think about reaching out and taking advantage of one of the 80 mentors, we have 80 plus mentors on the Startup Tree platform. If you're not familiar with Startup Tree, hang on the workshop at the end. I'll talk in more detail about that and answer your questions on that. But Startup Tree is a little bit like LinkedIn, but for entrepreneurs. It's anyone from the Temple community can participate in it. We have students in here, alumni, faculty, and staff that are on the platform. We also have, as I said, over 80 mentors. We also have investors from the angel community in the Philadelphia region who are on this platform, and other business members from that community. So it's a great place to find a mentor, connect with a mentor, book appointments, and that's the system that we're using for that. You can use the QR code in the top left corner to join Startup Tree if you're not already a member. All right, so tonight's the kickoff of our workshop series. We're going to be doing 5 more workshops every Wednesday night. I hope you register for all of them, and if you can make it, that's great. If you can't, take advantage of those recordings, go back and watch them after the fact. In addition to this series of workshops, and you can see it's covering a wide variety of topics, each of them is designed to help you prepare to submit your idea. But for those of you who may be on the fence about entering the Be Your Own Boss Bowl, first, I'd encourage you to do that. You're going to learn a whole lot from the process. But also, I would say to you that the content in these workshops, we've heard and gotten feedback from people that, even if I didn't enter that Be Your Own Boss Bowl competition, there's a lot of good stuff here I didn't know about doing a startup. So hopefully you'll find value in each and every one of them. In addition to the workshop events, we also offer other special events. So on March 9th, a special event for peer mentoring with our Entrepreneurial Student Association, and that's at 12 noon during the day, where you can get feedback on your idea from other students and other members of the ESA. On the 21st in the evening, we'll be doing a special expert mentoring night, where we'll bring a team of mentors in for a 2-hour workshop where you can go into various breakout rooms, talk to mentors, get any of your last-minute questions answered as you work through and try to finalize your submissions. As you can see, The submission deadline is March 23rd at 11:59 p.m. Finalists will be announced April 8th after all of the judging is done. Then for the finalists, we offer additional support. There'll be special individual pitch coaching sessions for all of the finalists. And then I'd encourage everybody to come back and join us on the 21st for the final pitch event and the awards ceremony. I mentioned this is just one of our awesome corporate sponsors, and this is NYCE, and they have a property just off of the edge of Temple campus called the Tech Mansion, where students and alums can go there to live and be completely immersed in an entrepreneurial environment. All of the members at Tech Mansion are all working on their startups, and they provide lots of great additional resources and mentoring through their program that enhances what we're already doing in the IEI. And we partner together on a number of different things. So this is just an example of one corporate sponsor, and we'll feature other sponsors as we go throughout the workshop series. Other significant resources that you should think about utilizing: Blackstone Launchpad, which is on the lower level of the Student Center. They offer very similar coaching and mentoring specifically for startups. The Temple SBDC, that's the Small Business Development Center. You can contact them. They run a number of additional workshops that are not specifically geared towards this competition, but are geared towards helping small businesses gain traction and grow. And then, of course, the Temple Writing Lab. If you're having any difficulties putting your thoughts together and you need second opinion or some help in that area, please tap into them and take advantage of them. And one that is not on here is the Temple Business Library. And actually, we'll be featuring Adam Shambaugh from the Temple Business Library next week. He'll be our guest speaker in that workshop. So it's another great resource for you to take advantage of. All right, so I know that's a lot to cover. I went through it pretty quickly. I'll be happy to answer questions about that stuff at the very end again. But what I want to do right now is try to jump in and let's get into tonight's presentation. So first and foremost is I want to give you an overview of the topics that you have to include in your pitch. Then we'll share some tips about how to structure your pitch, your slide deck. And then lastly, we'll look at tips on completing your pitch submission, on how to get that entered into the competition. All right, so first a couple questions. So this is part of the interactive. I want to hear from you. Who should your target pitch be towards? Who should you be targeting? Anyone want to take a shot? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Speak up or put it in the chat.
Maybe like the public in general? I don't know.
Okay, so the public in general. Anybody else?
I think maybe people who might be interested in investing in the business.
Okay, so potential investors. Anyone else?
Targeting myself.
Targeting yourself. Now, why do you say that? Are you somebody who? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh. Because I want to, I don't know, inspire myself, I guess.
Are you the? Well, okay. Are you a potential target customer for the product or service you're proposing?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we have the general public, we have targeted users or customers, and we have potential investors. Anything else? Anybody else? They're all good answers, but there's really only one that's right. Okay. Now, and I'll get to that in a second. So what topics do you think you should be including in your pitch deck? What kinds of things do you think your audience, whoever you think that audience is, what kinds of things do you think they're going to want to hear about?
The problem you're solving.
Okay, the problem you're solving. What else?
Maybe something that will benefit like the individual.
Okay, the benefits to the person that's going to utilize your product or service. That's good.
Can I change my answer to the first one to like investors?
Sure. Okay, so we two people from two suggested potential investors. All right. So back to what other topics should be in your pitch.
To go along with the problem you're solving, not just the problem, but how whatever service or product you're providing is going to actually solve that problem as well.
Okay, so how your product or service solves that problem. All right, that's good. The value proposition and your vision are two from the chat.
The customer journey.
The customer journey. Ooh, that's an interesting answer. Okay. That's something actually I want you to really, and we'll talk about that. That's something I want you to really think about as you are preparing your submission and thinking about your entire concept. Any others? Okay. Traction. Ooh, I love that word too. All right. So yes, and that is one of them as well. All right, so let's start digging into some of this, okay? So there are some things that an investor pitch is, okay? So what is it, okay? It's typically a 7 to 10 minute presentation, and it has an investor focus. So the right answer to the first question was potential investors, okay? This pitch should not be to the general public. It should not be to customers or target users, okay? That's a different pitch. That would be called a sales pitch, right? Because you'd be trying to sell them to use your service or product, okay? This is to attract people to potentially invest in your business, all right? Oftentimes it's used as a way to gather or to garner interest in your business. Therefore, you want to grab their attention early and you want to hit just the highlights. You want to keep them wanting to know more, all right? You want to give them enough that they're going to get excited, they're interested, and they want to know more. That's what this type of pitch should really be focused on, all right? Now, some other things that it is not, okay? So it's not a technology presentation. If any of you have a highly technical product or service or uses some brand new technology, that's great, but if you focus entirely on the technology, you're going to miss the point of this presentation. As I mentioned, it's not a sales presentation. You're not trying to land sales here. You're trying to land investors, okay, and investment. And the other thing to avoid is, back to the top of this page, is you're trying to hit the highlights, which means don't get down into the details. Don't get down into the weeds, all right? That's it. When you do, you will lose your audience. All right. So there are 4 key things that investors want to know. All right. They want to know 100 things, but 4 key things. Number 1 is, what's the problem you're trying to solve? Number 2 is, what's your solution and how are you different? What are you doing that's different from everybody else? All right. Why are you the team to solve the problem? So it may be you individually if you're a solopreneur and you haven't built out a team yet, or it may be you and your partners, part of the founding partners, okay? And in this competition, you can have a team of up to 4 people on your team. And then last but not least is, so when will you make me money? And notice it doesn't say when will you make money, it's when will you make me money, me being the investor. Because that's what they care about. I mean, yeah, they want to know when you're going to start making money as a whole, but ultimately, the way an investor makes their money is when they can cash out of their investment, right? And so keep in mind that they may love your idea. Maybe your idea is providing all kinds of great social or environmental impact. They may love that as well, but they're in this to make money. And don't ever lose sight of that fact, all right? So they're the 4 key things that they're going to want to know. And throughout the presentation, you're going to want to make sure that you're at least answering those 4 points for them. All right, now, there are more than 4 things you need to cover in this presentation. And this is probably the most important slide of the entire night. because it's going to cover all of those elements. And I often have people ask me, well, why do you start off with this slide, what the pitch is going to be? Why aren't you really talking about the business model or any of these other important topics? And that's because I want you to make sure that you have this as your checklist so that you know that you have to cover off every one of these topics when you do your submission. Now, some of these topics might be emphasized more in your executive summary. Some of these topics might be emphasized more in your pitch deck. Some of them might be covered more fully or completely in your financial projections. But between those 3 submissions, you have to cover all of these topics. All right, so we're going to work through this. I'm going to try to go in order. I think a couple of these are a little out of order, but I will cover off every one of these topics before we're done tonight. All right, so important slide. Make sure you come back to this slide when you do your own inventory of whether or not you've answered all the key elements for the submission. All right, so let's start with the title slide, okay? And the first thing I'm going to tell you about doing any kind of a slide presentation, any kind of an investor pitch, is every slide has 2 messages. And the 2 messages are what you see, okay? So whatever you're going to put on that slide that goes in your pitch deck, in this case, for the title slide, you're going to want your company name and your logo. You don't have to put the date of the presentation because you're going to be giving this presentation at different times over a period of time. So the date's kind of irrelevant. You want to make sure you're using good images, high quality images. And if you need help, in some cases, people do look to people like graphic designers. So like if you've designed your own logo and frankly, it isn't very good, you might want to think about getting somebody on board from the Tyler School of Art, a graphic designer to help you design a logo for this, all right? The next thing you have to think about in terms of there's 2 messages is, in addition to what you see, it's what are you going to talk about when that slide is up there? And the first thing I'll tell you is they need to be in sync. They don't need to repeat, but they need to be in sync, all right? So when you're putting up something that talks about, or a picture of your company or your logo or some graphic that kind of represents your company, okay, you're going to be talking about your company. And you're going to want to start with your title slide. You're going to want to try to have some kind of wow statement, all right? Something that really can make an impact to the audience. You're going to try to grab their attention early. So here's an example. And throughout tonight, I'm going to try to show you examples of real slides that were submitted by some past winners of the competition. So this is Jess. She had a company, Unify. This was her opening slide, kind of a visionary, inspirational, right? We got our arms up. We see the sun coming up on the horizon. This is a great thing. And her wow statement was, your financial onboarding assistant. So she's trying to get across what exactly is the benefit? What does her company do? All right. People can think about, well, onboarding, that's helping people getting started. An assistant is certainly assistance in doing something. Financial onboarding or a financial assistant, so they're going to provide me some kind of help with my finances. So it's something that kind of gets people hooked early on. All right. I believe, one of the people who provided an answer talked about, hey, a pitch should definitely cover off, well, what's the problem? And in this case, I'd say it's who's your customer and what's the problem, right? And it could be either or. So as you create your pitch, you have to create a story, okay? A good pitch is all about telling a story that flows from one topic to the next topic to the next topic in a way that keeps people's interest. And it's also answering the questions that the person listening would probably just get ready to ask, all right? So you typically start off with who's the customer and what's the problem they're having and why Why is it that you picked this problem? What inspired you to get involved into this, to do the research, to do all that hard work, to really understand in a deep, meaningful way what this person is struggling with, all right? Okay, and how you do this sets the tone. So there is no one way. I mean, I could give you a formula, but it doesn't work for everybody because it depends on the kind of problem you're solving, the industry you're solving, who your customer is. All of those factors come into play. So I'm going to show you an example of what Jess did with hers. All right. So her opening slide to introduce her customer and problem was this portion right here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it did not include the text down on the right. So basically her slide said, meet Lauren. Lauren's story is not unique. And it was just a picture of Lauren. So I want to stress, stop and think how simple this slide is. It's visually appealing. It's super simple. It's not junked up with a lot of text, a lot of bullet points. All right. Very simple. The magic is she's starting to tell a story. And that's what you see in this text down the right-hand side. I want to take you back to the beginning. I was financially independent at 16. So friends always looked to me for financial stuff because her friends saw her as being pretty responsible, right? 3 years ago, I found a brand executive or I was a brand executive at a major fashion company, made a lot of good money, had a great education. And she's telling a story. She's starting to try to grab people's interest and slowly draw them in. I shouldn't say slowly, but quickly draw them in, all right? And in this case, Laura, she's telling the story about Lauren, not necessarily her, all right? All right, her next slide was now setting up the problem. Again, the slide was just simply setting up the problem and then those two little graphics, 1 out of 2 and $104,000. And then on the right-hand side was her script, what she would say while that slide was up in front of the judges, all right? So when you create your pitch deck, even though I mentioned you won't be giving this actual pitch to the judges in this initial round of judging, they're going to take your slide deck and they're going to go through it themselves. But your visual and your verbal story are these two elements in that you're going to have the slide, and below the slide in PowerPoint, it gives you a place to put your notes. And in this case, your notes are this script. So you're going to want to think about what would you say to those potential investors while that slide was up on the screen, and then put that into your notes. That's your script. All right. Any questions about that? No? Okay.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Could you put like other things inside of the notes that weren't like part of the script, but you wanted to like, I don't know, like gestures maybe? Could you put like
what?
Like emphasis or raise his hand? I don't know. Can you?
No, I wouldn't suggest that. I mean, can you put other notes in the script? Absolutely. Like you could, in this particular case, she says, $104,000 average retirement savings, US adults 55 to 64. So notice there's a little footnote 2, right? So that footnote 2 could be in the notes as to where you got that data from. Some judges would look at that and they would say, well, I want to know where that number came from. How do I know that's real? And so some people actually would, at the bottom of their slide down here, they would actually put a little 2 and they put the footnote taken from the Journal of Financial Analysis, July 1922 or whatever the number is, right? And but some people don't like that on a slide. It kind of junks it up. And so they'll take that kind of information and they'll put that in the notes of the slide. But just keep in mind that when the judges are looking at this, they're looking at the slide visual and the messaging coming from that. And then they're looking at the notes typically as being the script of what you'd be saying. Okay, so if you're going to mix messages in the notes, I would do something like saying script and then write your script. And then underneath that, put other notes and then put your other notes. All right. Okay, here's another example of a problem slide. So this was for a different product. This was for a medical device product. You know, here they're trying to highlight this bubble, right? Whoops, sorry. This bubble wasn't there. Okay, this black circle on the left is not on the slide. The slide just said current treatment algorithms have unacceptable failure rates. And then it was trying to walk through and say like, well, diagnosis, only 50% of the cases are diagnosed. In medication, only, or 50% fail in the first 6 months. Laser treatment, 50% fail within 5 years. This other one, 47% fail within 5 years. So here they were trying to point out that for this problem, there are solutions, but look at the failure rates for those solutions. That's unacceptable. And so they're just trying to drive home the point that this is a problem, the current solutions are inadequate, and here's why. Okay. It's another way of trying to, get across the idea of the problem, right? Here's another example of a problem slide. Again, this was a medical device, but they're saying, look at these other forms of treatment. All of these other forms of treatment have key issues that make them suboptimal. They're not the best, all right? And basically using this as a setup to explain why these aren't any good and why they're better than these solutions, all right? So again, just trying to give you some examples of, let me go back, some examples of how you can set up what the problem is, why it's a problem, all right? And notice even in here, we're not getting into doing what I would call a competitive analysis. All we're doing here is saying, this is a problem, there are solutions out there, they're not working, here's why, okay? Or here's why this is such an opportunity now. Any questions? Any of you have a problem that you think you're going to have a difficulty in trying to describe what that problem is, or who has that problem? No? Okay. All right. So the next thing you're going to need to focus on is the market opportunity, all right? Investors want to know that if they're going to put their money into something, it's something that's going to be growing, not something that's going to be dying. So for example, when CDs and DVDs started hitting the market for music, right? If you were a company that was designing the next generation record player, you would have had a hard time raising money because that was a declining market, right? People were throwing their record players out the door and everybody's buying CD players and DVD players, and that's what's in their cars. And, it's convenient, it's easier, right? And so you need to be able to convey to investors, how big is this market? How big is this opportunity? Is it growing? How quickly is it growing? Okay, and if it has different market segments, which market segment are you going to be going after first? All right, so this market opportunity and being able to define that and how big it is, this is something that we're going to focus on in more depth next week in the workshop. And we'll have, as I mentioned, Adam Shambaugh will be joining us from the Temple Business Library, and he'll actually be showing you tools that you can use in the library to do your market research to be able to come up with what is the size of these markets, okay? How do you do that, all right? So again, I mentioned, how big is the target market size? If there are segments, what's the size of each segment? How would you prioritize those segments? They're all really important. Now, another key concept, and again, I'll cover this a little more next week, is so when you're sizing a market, how big is that pie? But also, how big is your slice of that pie? And people often fall into this trap of saying, well, you know, I've got an idea for a really highly efficient energy efficient replacement window for houses, okay? And so they'll come in their presentation and they'll say something like, you know, well, there's a $13 billion construction market in the United States. That's my market. But that's actually not your market. That's the entire construction market. And if you're offering a product like an energy efficient replacement window, then you're not even targeting new construction. You should be targeting renovations. And that's a different size market. So often what happens is you need to be thinking about being very specific about who your customers are, who your target market is, or the segment that you're after. And that means what I call peeling the onion. So you start off with this onion, that's your total market, but now you've got to get very specific as to, well, which part of this market are you servicing with your product or service? And so that market's going to be naturally smaller. It's a subset of that. Okay. And in this case, you might be saying also, well, what percentage of that market can I actually address? You're not going to go in and take 100% of that market, certainly not coming right out of the starting gate, especially if you have a lot of other competitors. And so you're not going to have to think through, well, what percentage, what share of that market do you think you can actually win? Okay. And in fact, there may be other subsets of this serviceable market that you need to think about. So for example, even in the replacement window market, you may only be launching in the United States. So you have to be careful in the research you're doing. If you come up with, this is what the market size is for North America, that's not good enough. If you can only service customers that are in the United States, then that's a subset of North America. If you can only service customers that are in the Mid-Atlantic region, here in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, New York, Mid-Atlantic states, well, then that's a subset again. So being able to size the market appropriately is important because investors look for this as what I call one of the rookie mistakes, where you come in and you go, I'm addressing a $13 billion construction industry, when in fact you're not. And that's a very quick way of an investor listening or looking at your presentation to say, this person doesn't know. They haven't done their research. They haven't done their homework. They haven't thought this through. All right. So again, just to give you an idea, we'll get into this more in next week's workshop. But to give you some examples of slides of how some people have been able to present this information. And again, the circle to the left is not what would be on the slide. It would be just this information. So, you know, here, they said there's 192 million calls made annually to 9/11 emergency medical services. 50% of them are non-emergencies. That's $3,000 per visit, per call, that ends up getting wasted for all of those non-medical emergencies. You do the math, it comes out to 288 billion in excess costs each year. All right. And so they were trying to address a way of being able to size this market and how their product is servicing a portion of this market. Another slide, this is just another way somebody's come at it. There are 80 million patients worldwide that have glaucoma, okay, the global market. And then they looked at that and they came up with how they would size that from a financial perspective. 900,000 patients in the US will go blind within the next 10 years from glaucoma. All right, and that's 3.4 million in the US. And this was all about cost to acquire customers. But you're going to need to do a slide that defines how big or how small this is. The other thing I would say to you is, if when you do your market sizing, that number comes up pretty small. So if your market size is, I'll say $1 million, and that's your serviceable market size, come see me, because that's typically a market that's pretty small for an investor to get excited about. And I'd love the opportunity to talk to you about that, or love the opportunity to get you connected to one of our mentors who can also talk to you about how you could maybe broaden that market a little bit and try to come up with something that would be more attractive to a potential investor. All right. You know, in this particular slide, they're saying, hey, it's a $6 trillion food industry that's being disrupted by a millennial mentality. And now that was a lead-in. There were other subsequent slides, but that was a lead-in slide that kind of sets the mark as to how big this is. And then they drilled in on subsequent slides to show what their market share was from that. All right. Here's one where all they did was put up on the slide, 2.15 billion spent on asthma-related diseases. All right. Now, their particular product is not going to address all asthma-related diseases or address all of the things that other devices are focused on, but it was a way of setting a marker to then take that discussion further with the potential investor. Okay. As I mentioned, we'll go more into that next week. So the next category is the product service description. And again, this is where you're going to describe the product or service that you're planning to produce, okay, for your target market. And here it's important to be able to explain what it is, what it does, the benefits it provides, but you don't necessarily want to address what I would call the secret sauce, okay? So here, you know, the second bullet says, why and how does it solve the defined problem? Why it solves it? Absolutely. How it solves it? Only at a very high level. You do not want to get into the details, especially if you've got something proprietary, some kind of intellectual property that you want to protect, that you're thinking you might want to go get patented. You wouldn't share it at that level, at that detailed level. All right, so be aware of that. You can provide diagrams, photos, videos. Again, for example, if you're filing a provisional patent for your technology, you don't want to include the diagram for that patent in this package. All right, that's inappropriate. That's part of your patent filing. You're going to keep that to yourself until that patent's approved. Once the patent's approved, it'll become public knowledge. But at least for now, you keep that confidential. Also, it says in here, videos. I just want to highlight to you that a lot of times people will make short videos. They will put a link in their slide deck. So thinking that the judges are going to click that link, it's going to take them to their video, and they're going to see this really slick video that they produced that answers all of the investors' questions. Be careful of that. There's no guarantee that a judge is going to click on any active links in your submission. And in particular, you're submitting your pitch deck as a PDF. So it may not work. Embedding active links in your PDF may not work. So keep that in mind. You have the ability to upload other things like the optional videos that I talked about, or you can upload optional photos, diagrams, other pictures, etc. You can do that. Be careful of putting active embedded links in your presentation. All right. So here's some examples of some product slides that other teams have used. This isn't bad. You know, it gives you an idea of Pulmaware, so that's the name of the product. It gives you a picture of it, shows you that this inserts into this patch. You don't know this, but that patch then, you know, fits onto your chest. This was a device to measure your breathing for asthma. It has a little quarter down here, gives you an idea of what's the scale, what's the size of that product. That's great. Over here, it shows you the functionality, the benefits. It allows you to track. It allows you to look at trends. It allows you to manage. Does anybody want to give a suggestion as to why this is not a great slide? Anybody want to offer a suggestion on what could have been better about this slide?
Is it the font size?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you clearly.
Is it the size of the writing?
Yes. Yes, and the fact that there is so much writing. All right. So if you were to put this slide in your slide deck, all right, and you were actually presenting it, the entire time you were talking about this slide, the viewer would be trying to read that really tiny little print like this. They'd be like, ah. And guess what? While they're focused on that, they're not listening to you. Okay. Now, keep in mind the initial round of judging, you're not doing the presentation. They have the slide deck. They're going to look through it. But even so, you want to make these slides as simple and as easy and as visually attractive as you can. And anytime you're using a font that's that tiny, you're forcing people to really, dig in, and they kind of lose the big picture of what the slide's trying to convey. So
Hey, Greg,
great.
sorry, can you go back to that slide real quick? Would you have recommended maybe making this like 3 different slides so that everything was like a bit bigger, keeping that image, of the device, but then 3 slides telling kind of the story?
They could do that, but then I'd suggest you have to go through those 3 slides pretty quickly. Or another way to come at this would be take all of that little fine print and drop it down into your notes, right? Because this is a case where this was actually Nick Delmonico, and Nick was probably talking about exactly what those small words were, all right?
So instead of putting your actual script on the slide, put it in the notes and
yes,
have the track, trend, manage.
Yes, I would have just said number 1, track, trend, manage. That's all I would have said, those 3 words, and then take all that fine print, drop it into your script, and it would be, Pulmaware provides 3 tremendous benefits not found in any other product. First, we use Pulmaware, and it's connected to applications to monitor key indicators of lung function, including wheezing, coughing, inhalation, exhalation rate. It also tracks your heart rate, your respiratory. I mean, that's what he would be saying. So you don't need to put that on the slide, okay? Because otherwise, you're saying it, they're trying to read it. If they're reading bullet number 3 and you're still talking about bullet number 1, you're out of sync, all right? Okay, here's another slide. Again, this was a medical device slide, and originally it was this was actually a more refined version. Their first version of the slide was really bad. But here they were talking about VisiPlate. So VisiPlate combines efficiency with efficacy rather with nanotechnology. And then they're calling out, this is how the product's going to work. Fluid flows through the drainage tube into the nanoplate. Fluid pockets form between these 2 layers of tissue. Eye pressure ultimately decreases and blindness is prevented, all right? Again, you could have put that into your notes. That could have been part of your script, and you could have just had the 2 pictures focusing on, in the first picture, you'll see we embed the device here. In the second picture, you'll see this is where it is located within your eyeball. Kind of creepy, but you get the idea. This is a slide I love, all right? And this is from Jared Cannon, and when he did his pitch for Simply Good Jars, all right? So there's an old expression, a picture's worth 1,000 words. All he did was show a picture. And from this picture, he was able to tell an entire story. So his product was Simply Healthy Good Jars products, right? So Simply Healthy salads in recyclable jars in an easy to access, easy to purchase form. You go to the refrigerator, you select the product you want. When you take out the product, it automatically gets charged to your credit card because it uses a technology where you don't have to put in codes, you're not pushing a button, you're just swiping your credit card and then lifting a product off the shelf, and it automatically knows what product you selected. All right, I mean, a beautifully simply concept, beautifully demonstrated, because that picture, there's all kinds of things he can highlight in that picture, all right, just from that simple picture. Now, here I'm going to show you 3 slides to show you kind of the evolution of going from very technical, very complex, way too much information, to a very simple, kind of like what Jared did with his slide from Simply Good Jars, to a very simple slide that you can use to convey the same information. So here they're showing there's 2 different kinds of glucose monitors today, or there are many kinds of glucose monitors today. Okay, there's strips, which of course you have to prick your finger, draw blood, use that to measure your glucose level from your blood. And here they're going into, oh, this is how many times a day you have to do it and how big it is. And then these continuous monitoring devices. Okay, again, all these bullet points, all of this information, right? Plus, these pictures are all pretty small, and it's pretty hard to see exactly what the hell they're talking about. So this was the next iteration, the next version of that slide, okay, where we talked to them about improving it. So they came up with, well, let's focus on the big one, the thing that people find most objectionable, and that's having to prick your finger. It's painful. People don't want to get bloody. And so they focused on that. And they put a big picture of that, put a big red line through it and said, we're not this, right? Our solution, no more finger sticks. You don't need to do that anymore, all right? But again, all this data over here on the left about insulin dosing, type 1 over here. Oh yeah, you have gestational diabetes. That's women who get diabetes resulting from their pregnancy. Performance with athletes, measuring their glucose levels in a sports environment. All of this like miscellaneous data that really does nothing but confuse the issue, all right? The final version of the slide that they put in their slide deck was this. Our mission, no more finger sticks, right? And so it made it very easy for them to develop the script that this slide has a tremendous visual impact. Immediately people are getting the idea. You mean you're going to be able to eliminate this? This is the biggest pain point. You can get rid of that? And then they told the story that was a combination of the benefits they're offering and how they're doing it for these different market segments. All right, so simple is almost always better than too much information trying to jam it all in there. All right, let's move on to the competitive landscape. So one of the things you need to be able to demonstrate in your pitch, as well as your executive summary, is do you know who your competitors are? And how well do you understand them? And what are your competitive advantages against them? How are you different and unique? All right. So when you do your competitive landscape, you got to do a lot of research. People, investors want to know, if this is a big problem, how are people solving it today? And there are typically different kinds of competitors. You have direct competitors, people who are doing almost identical to something identical to what you're doing or what you're offering. There are indirect competitors, people that are solving that same problem, but they're solving it in a completely different way. All right. And then you have substitutes and alternates. And substitutes and alternates are other ways that people might be using to solve the problem. It's not a direct or an indirect competitor. All right. And they're the ones that typically are like the status quo. So how are they solving it? How are your target customers solving that problem today? All right. They want to know that. Who are the competitors and how are people solving that problem today? And oh yeah, why isn't that a good solution? Like, why don't they like that solution today? So this involves a lot of research of your competitors, and it also means you got to talk to your prospective customers. You got to get out of your dorm room, your bedroom, your apartment, get out of 1810 Accelerator space and go talk to your target market and find out what are they using now to solve those problems. All right. So what differentiates your product or service? This is where you're going to hone in on how are you better? How are you different and better? So that could be performance-wise, it could be lower cost, it could be lower side effects, it could be easier to use, it could be it's compatible with my current, my current processes, the things I do today, my current routines, right? But there are an endless list of potential benefits that you provide, and you need to zero in on those benefits that make you different from the others. Okay, you need to understand, so how entrenched is your competition? Are you going up against people that have been in this industry, they're well established, there's 4 competitors and each of them's got like 20 or 30% market share? Or are you a new player coming into this market, but guess what? It's a new and growing market, and the other players that are out there, they're not well established either. So everybody's going to be fighting for market share. Everybody's still early in the game, all right? That's an important concept, all right? What are their weaknesses? So I always tell people, when you're looking at your competitors, you want to look at what are the gaps and what are the overlaps. The gaps are things they're not solving, value that they're not providing, that you think you can provide in your solution. And the overlaps are things you're planning to do, benefits you're planning to provide, and benefits they're also providing. And now you want to size up, well, how well do you do it than how much better do you do it than them? Okay. What other barriers are there to entry? And I want to really stress here for you that this is not what barriers are you facing to enter this market. It's what barriers would other people face if they wanted to enter the market once you're in it. Okay. So I've seen people put together awesome presentations, and then they come to this barriers to entry and they say, oh, I have 5 barriers to entry. I need money to start my company. I need to find partners. I need to find a really awesome technical advisor. You don't want to be telling me those things. I want to hear from you. What barriers are you creating that would keep other people out? How are you slamming the door on these other potential competitors so that you've got an advantage over them, so that they'd be discouraged from coming after you and trying to enter this market and capture some of your market share? All right, so make sure you understand it's not about your barriers to entry, it's about what kind of barriers can you create for other people. Bottom line is, how are you going to win? How are you going to win against these people? All right, so after you've done all of this analysis, all right, you're going to be using this as your guiding light, which is, how do my company, I'm best at, and why? What do you think you can be best at? Because then that's going to help you with your competitive positioning as to how and why you're better than everybody else out there. And again, another way of looking at that is just, well, why will we win? So in this particular case, we're going to be providing a solution for the whole family using the smartest, latest cutting edge technology. And we're going to be offering it in a way that all of the people that would be using our product can easily access it, right? So this was their way of setting up what their competitive advantage was. All right, so you're going to need to produce a competitive slide. I'm going to suggest that you use it in this kind of a format, which is a competitive grid format, where you're going to list who your competitors are across the top, including yourself, and you're going to select criteria for how you want to compare yourself to those other competitors. All right, and this criteria are going to be the biggest, most important things to your customer and potentially to your investor. And I'll give you an example of that, because people typically think it's one way or the other, but you can actually mix those two in this slide. Now, investors are going to want to know what your competitive advantages are from a customer perspective, right? How you size yourself up against your competitors from the customer's perspective, and then throwing 1 or 2 in as to why you're better than your competitors from an investor perspective is important, because, hey, your competitors may be looking for investment too. And so you want to be able to explain to your potential investors why you're the smarter choice. If they have $50,000 to invest in a firm and they're interested in investing in a company in this industry, and it's you or these other competitors, why should they put their money with you? All right, so that's how to think of this. And again, these examples down the left-hand side are just some of them. You know, it's easy to use, it's custom fit, comfort or safety, it's durable or reliable, you know, etc. There's an endless list of things. You just need to pick the ones that you think are most important to your customers and investors, and the ones that highlight how you're different and better. All right, so here's again a slide. This was from Jared and Simply Good Jars. And what he did is he used a combination of comparison, items for comparison that he thought would be indicative of from his customer's perspective as well as from an investor perspective. So he was comparing himself to Farmer's Fridge and Bite Foods. First thing I would say, he did one thing wrong on this slide, and that's that he put himself all the way at the end. And I'd suggest that you always want to put your company all the way at the beginning. So he really should have been where Farmer's Fridge is in this slide. Then he said, let me focus in on the things where I know I have a real advantage. One of them was, if you're an investor and you're going to put money into my product, my company, you should know that it's only going to cost $4,000 for me to put one of these refrigerators in every location. So I've got a lower cost to deploy my product into the field than any of my competitors. That's important for an investor to know. Customers don't care, right? But an investor would care about that. The tech component, all right? So Byte was using RFID technology. Farmer's Fridge was using a fully custom machine. That's risky, right? He was using smart shelving, which is a technology that's readily available and it's more cutting edge, all right? So again, he was trying to differentiate himself. He's showing that his product's organic, the other two aren't, sorry. He was showing that his shelf life was 5 days. Yeah, Byte was 5 days. Farmer's Fridge was only 3 days. So you can see, if you go down his column, he's showing he's got a competitive advantage in every area. In some cases, okay, he's tied, like things on salads or shelf life. Okay, his competitors have some of that stuff too. But he's trying to show a holistic picture of what he felt were the most important elements for his audience, his investors, to know about. Now, some people are going to use this type of a format, which is they call it a competitive matrix. One advantage I will point out to using this over a competitive matrix is that in this format, and you may have seen this used in other places, online, in articles, etc., even in textbooks, one of the disadvantages of this is you can only measure two things, right? So here you're measuring how expensive or economical it is versus how practical or how fun it is, right? That's only two axes. Over here, you're measuring 6 or 7 different things. So you can get a lot more information and convey that to your investors than you can using this format. Plus, it's all relative, right? Ideally, you're going to want to set this up so on the competitive matrix, your company is always in that upper right-hand quadrant, right? My great company. But it's all relative. Like, how far up in that upper right-hand quadrant are you? How far down, below the line, below the axis, or to the left of the axis? That's all relative. There's no way to really tell. It's much more effective to be able to put this in here. And in some cases, instead of putting X's, right, you can put other information in there. So like one of the things that he could have been putting in here is cost. And so instead of organic, let's say that that line was showing cost, the end cost or price for the product, right? And he could be showing that his salad's $9, Bites is $12, and Farmer's Fridge is $13. And he could be showing quantitatively how he's better. So again, you can use either format of showing your competitive analysis. We prefer and encourage you to use the other format, which is really the grid, the competitive grid. All right. Before I go on, any questions about the competitive analysis, how you're going to show it, what you're going to show? All right, I'm trying to keep, oh, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question. So are you saying to, instead of having this, like what is represented in this slide, you're saying do it in more of a simplistic chart like this?
Like this.
Okay.
Okay, we have found that investors prefer it, and we found that our judges, okay, and not all of our judges are investors, okay, but a lot of our judges that are from the business community, startup community, this is what provides the most information in a very simple, succinct way.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and in fact, sometimes I see people do it this way. You know, they'll do it, and I think to myself, like in the back of my head, I'll think to myself, what are they hiding? All right, you're only showing me two comparisons to your competitors. In this one, they're showing how easy it is to use and how flexible or usable the technology is. That's it. And so I would definitely try to use that other matrix, the grid template, because you can convey so much more information. All right. And yeah, as Lindsay said in the chat, you always want to put you first, put your company first in that first column. All right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about intellectual property. That was one of the boxes on that, that little journey map of all of the key topics that you need to address. So intellectual property, this is something you should include if you feel you have a story to tell. It is not something that you must include, in particular, if you don't have any intellectual property to protect, all right? So intellectual property is things like patents, trademarks, copyrighted material, industry trade secrets. Anything that falls into those kinds of categories conveys intellectual property. Your brand, for example, you're trying to create a brand, the name of your company, how it's depicted, what's behind that brand, the story behind the brand and everything. Well, you don't want to create a big brand and have a great story and not trademark, right, your name, because your name and how it's displayed is everything. All right. So for those of you that may be familiar with a clothing brand called Life is Good, all right, and that's the little simple character drawings on t-shirts. They're very plain, simple, kind of old for you guys. I realize probably not your generation, but they trademarked that right away so that no one else could copy that concept of using those little sketches, and they're very stylized. Also, nobody else could use the expression life is good as it relates to their clothing brand because they trademarked it, they own it. And if somebody comes along and tries to copy it, they'll sue them and try to block them from using it. So you need to look at, do you, with your idea, have any kind of intellectual property that you want to protect? Go ahead, somebody have a question? Oh, sorry, okay. So if you think you do, and you need some help thinking that through, contact me. And I'm happy to talk to you a little bit about that. I'm happy to point you to some people and some places where you can get some free help to go a little further in it. If you're planning to patent your product or your service in some way, maybe a utility patent or design patent, you definitely want to mention that. And again, I would suggest you start investigating, researching that, come talk to me about that so we can get you started on that. But that is something you'll want to emphasize. You'll want to put that into your pitch because protecting intellectual patent or your intellectual property is a big plus with investors. You might have a great idea leveraging some technology, blah, 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 and they're going to ask you, is any of this patentable? And if you say no, or I don't know, you're at a disadvantage, all right? Because having some kind of patent protection gives them comfort that when they invest money into you, there's already a barrier to entry for another company, all right? There's already something else that another company would have to really consider how they're going to get around that, and they can't just come in and copy you. All right, so mentioning I filed for my patent, or even mentioning I intend to file for a patent is better than saying nothing. But you can't say you intend to file for a patent if in fact you don't have anything that's patentable. So you need to do a little bit of homework, a little bit of research before you make that kind of a claim. All right. Any questions on IP? So you mention it, you highlight it if you have it, even if you haven't started it yet. I've had teams come into this and say, I'm currently researching filing my provisional patent, or I've contacted 2 lawyers and I'm working on getting my provisional patent ready. That's a stronger statement than ignoring it completely. All right, okay. So as I mentioned, IP is a security blanket for investors. It lets them know that you understand there is something to be done and that there is something to protect, okay? But you do not have to put it in your slide deck. We've had people have gone on to win the Bureau Boss Bowl and they didn't have any IP that they were protecting. So don't feel like, oh, geez, I don't have a patent and I'm not going to file for a patent and there's nothing here. Don't worry about that. All right. Okay, let's talk about go-to-market strategy. And so that's how are you going to take your idea out to the marketplace? And that could mean in terms of promoting it. That also means in terms of selling it and distributing it. So it's getting it to market. All right. How are you going to reach your target customers? What are your marketing channels? Okay. Also your sales or distribution channels. Right. And then also as part of this, typically, it leads to the next question, which is, so how are you going to make money? What is your revenue model? Some examples of that are you selling a product or are you selling a service? Are you selling it directly to an end consumer? Are you selling it to a business? Are you B2C or B2B? Okay. Are you providing a service to one group, but charging a different group? So that's a multi-sided model. Okay. Is your business model a multi-sided model? Are you like an Uber where you're really a marketplace where you're providing people who need a service with people who provide a service? These people make money, these people pay money, and you're in the middle collecting, right? So you need to think through what that is. What is your revenue model? And it's not always either multi-sided market. It could be that you direct selling. It could be that you're planning to develop this technology to make this product, but you don't want to get into the weeds of how to make that product or even having to make that product. You might want to say, hey, my best bet is to develop this technology and test it out, verify that it works, verify that people want it, and then I'm going to go to Johnson & Johnson and I'm going to license the technology to them, let them make it and sell it. I'll sit back, I'll collect royalties. That's not a bad gig, right? You think of all the headaches that you would eliminate, not having to find a manufacturer, not have to buy the product, not have to worry about scheduling, delivery to the customer. All you'd have to do is find somebody that you think loves the idea and wants to license it from you and just sit back and collect royalties. So that's actually a revenue model. And depending upon what your product or service is, that might be an option for you to think about. Or is it a subscription model, right? That's all the rage. Everything is moved over from sales to subscriptions now. And that's great because it provides recurring revenue, right? Or is it something where you're going to develop a product or service and you're not going to sell it? You're just going to rent it or lease it. Okay. People don't want to buy it. It's too expensive. They may only need it once. And so you're going to make it available for people to use it, give it back, then sell it out again or lease it out again, collect more revenue, get it back, lease it out again, collect more revenue, get it back. So there are lots of different revenue models that you can consider, and you should think about them. And even if you've got one in mind, stop and brainstorm a little bit, talk to some of the mentors. There might be some hidden revenue that you haven't thought of. So if you're selling a product, could you be selling service contracts, maintenance agreements? Could you be selling installation for something? Instead of selling it to them, letting them install it. There might be all kinds of additional revenue opportunities that you haven't thought of that could be part of your revenue model. All right, other things to think about in terms of your go-to-market strategy. Oftentimes I'll hear people say, I'm addressing this market and I got these 4 market segments and that's my plan. I'm going to go out after these 4 market segments. I would encourage you to think that through. That's a big task to take on 4 market segments. Investors like to know that you're going to try to minimize the risk with their money. And so you might want to target the most important market segment and launch in that area, and then figure out, well, who would be the next one I'd go after and who would be the next one I would go after. And also be aware that each of those market segments may have completely different marketing plans, sales plans, and sales channels to get that product sold and out and delivered, okay? You need to think about partnerships and alliances. Are there any key players that you've got to get on board? Any key companies in that supply chain you need to get on board in order for your venture to be successful, in order for you to do what you want to do, okay? And one big tip is when people say, my go-to-market strategy is I'm going to leverage social media and I'm going to utilize all of my network. I'm going to utilize my 50,000 connections on Instagram and Facebook. That is not a good answer, because guess what? Everybody says that. Now, maybe you are the exception. Maybe you have 100 or 200,000 followers. That's awesome. But investors are going to want to know, even how are you going to leverage that? What other programs are you going to be utilizing to get the word out and to market to your target segments? So be wary of that. Here's an example of a slide that a company used on their go-to-market strategy. Now, in this case, they were doing a multi-sided market. So they had to reach lawyers and they had to reach immigrants coming in the United States, all right? And so they were smart enough to realize completely 2 different market segments and 2 different ways having to reach out to tap those markets. And so they said, we're going to go to events, we're going to create partnerships, and we're going to have direct channels directly to these target segments. And then they broke out what was different about the events, because there's different types of events, right? What was different about the partnerships? Because there were going to be different partnerships they had to leverage. And then going direct to each of these market segments, that's awesome. But the way they were going to reach those different segments had to be different. All right. So again, be aware that you've got to look at tailoring your go-to-market strategy and your communications channels to those market segments. And if you've got multiple segments, it's going to be different for each one, or could be different for each one. All right. I'm going to now move on to the team. So your management team for your venture. You need to, in your slide and how you present your venture, you need to talk about why you're the right team to execute on this idea. So there are a couple different ways you can present your team slide. I'll show you a couple examples. If you have multiple members on the team, you're going to want to list them. You as the CEO, if you are the CEO, you as the CEO should be focused, because if you make it to the finals, you as the CEO will be doing the pitch. You can have your other partners as part of the pitch, but the CEO has to be really the featured speaker. You're going to want to highlight any other key pieces of information about the team that are going to make the investors feel good. Again, it's all about de-risking this venture. So if you started up other companies and had successful exits, you're going to want to mention that. Or if you even just started up other companies and you've had any success and you haven't exited, you're going to want to mention that. All right. Showing that you've had some experience in starting a venture is better than none at all. All right. Even if you fail, because it kind of lends itself to the idea of they tried it, they failed, they've learned a lot of things out of it. Now let's see what they've learned from it. All right. If you have inventions, current or past, any other discoveries that you may have come across that would help, again, de-risk this venture for them. If you've got any degrees, advanced degrees, you're going to want to share that. Any other certifications, you're going to want to share that. And also, if you're a solopreneur, if you're a team of one right now, but you know that when you go to get this thing off the ground, you're really going to need help. You know you're going to need a CMO, a chief marketing officer, or a CTO, chief technology officer. It's okay to say, hey, my team consists of me. I've identified 2 key people that I'm going to need to bring into my founding team. I'm working on that, or I plan to be working on that. I'm going to look to fill this position and this position. Acknowledging that you know you need help is not a weakness. That's actually a strength. It helps investors sit back and they can look at you, hear you, and they say, good, this person knows what they don't know. They know they are not an expert in marketing or in technology or in finance. And so they know they need to bring somebody on the team who is an expert in that area. And that's a strong statement, okay? As opposed to the solopreneur who doesn't acknowledge that and tries to pass themselves off as an expert in everything, because that's pretty difficult and pretty rare, all right? Other thing you can do in your management team slide is you want to highlight if you have some kind of an advisory board. Now, your advisory board could be members of an informal or formal advisory board who you consult with occasionally or on a regular basis to bounce ideas off of, to get help, to ask their advice, to ask for connections to other people that might be able to help you. And having an advisory board is a good thing to have. It shows, again, you know that you're not an expert in everything and you're being proactive in going out and getting help in those areas that you need help, all right? So if you can identify a few people, ask them if they'd be willing to be on your advisory board. If you're really serious about making this go, do that. You can ask your mentors, would they be willing down the road or right now? Would they be willing to consider being on your advisory board? If they say yes, great. Ask them if it's okay for you to put them on your management team slide as an advisor. And I've seen that done a lot. I know my picture has shown up on a lot of management team slides as being part of their advisory board because I had been mentoring them. All right, but always make sure you ask for permission before you do that. All right. There's another old expression, I'm a fan of old expressions, and that's investors bet on the jockey, not on the horse. So in this analogy, the horse is the idea. Investors hear good ideas all the time, all the time. They're probably listening to 20 to 50 ideas a day, hundreds of ideas over the course of the year. And so they hear lots of great ideas, but they don't invest in every great idea they hear because they want to know how strong is the management team, because that's the team that's going to make it happen. Execution is what it's about. And they're not going to write a check and hand you 50 or 100,000 or $500,000 of their money if they don't trust you. And so you need to establish credibility with your team. You've pulled together the right people with the right skill set, the right mindset. You're coachable, you listen, you take advice. You need to get that all worked into your mindset and convey it as part of your management slide. So keep in mind, from an investor's perspective, they hear lots of great ideas. They're going to almost always bet on the idea that's got the great jockey. All right, here's some examples of some slides. In this case, little pictures. Here are the 4 team members, the roles that they had on the teams. And then notice on the right-hand side, they showed past experience, okay, in terms of what they've done. And that's a way of establishing credibility, right? So these guys they're all a little older. They've all had full-time jobs. They've had some experience under their belt. Oh, and by the way, notice down here, they also participated in the Dream It Accelerator. So that's a pretty well-known accelerator program. That's a feather in their cap. Notice over here, this is the list of advisors that they have. Oh, they've got an advisor from QVC, from Walgreens, from Catalina, from GSI Commerce. They're big name companies. And also the people who are from those companies are in senior level roles. So they're getting some pretty heavy advice from that list of advisors. That's a really powerful team slide, okay? Here's another example. So again, this was Jared Cannon when he was out initially. This is several years old. I want to emphasize that because I'm sure Jared's team slide today would look a lot different from what it did back then. So, Jared featured as the CEO, and then here were the people he had on his team and their previous roles in other companies. All right. And again, he's showing these are seasoned veterans from different named companies. And so they had some credibility. All right. Here's another slide. So this is just, hey, there was a CEO and a CTO. They're highlighting their educational background. They're highlighting these are companies that they've worked with, okay, or worked in. Notice over here, they're located over at the Pennovation Center at Penn, which means they were part of the Pennovation program. So again, they're kind of putting a little feather in their cap that, hey, we were part of that program. If you've been part of other accelerators, if you participate in other types of accelerator programs, received any other types of training, again, it might be something you want to consider adding to your slide because it adds credibility to you as a management team. All right, we're going to move into the financials, and I'm going to start talking even faster because we're running out of time here. So the last element of what you have to submit to the competition is your financial statement, your financial forecast. So a profit and loss statement is the same thing as an income statement for those of you who aren't necessarily knowledgeable on financials, okay? And we ask you to submit a 3-year financial projection, all right? Now, when you submit that as part of your submission to the competition, you're going to submit a spreadsheet. The first year is going to be by month. So year 1 by month, year 2 and year 3 by quarter. So you'll summarize into 3-month chunks for those last 2 years. You'll put an annual total at the end of each year. All right, that's the submission portion. I'll go into more detail on that in the financial workshop, which is the next to the last workshop in this series. All right, but we're talking about the pitch tonight. And so this is an example of a slide that you might want to put into your pitch. So not might want to, you're going to have to put into your pitch. So you need to take that 3-year financial projection that has lots of detail, and you're going to need to summarize it and put one slide in your pitch that shows your financial projections. All right. So it only needs to be 3 years. Some of the examples I'm going to show you shows 5, but just make sure you only need to show 3 years. You're going to want to show drivers, revenue, expenses, and what's your EBITDA. EBITDA stands for earnings before interest and taxes, depreciation, and oh my God, I can't remember the last one. I'll get back to it. I can't remember what the A stands for. But basically net profit. Okay, EBITDA in this case could also be shown as net profit. All right, you can show it either way. Quickly, drivers are things that indicate your volume. So drivers could be units sold, like on this sheet. So if you were making a product and selling a product, it would be the number of units that you sold. If you were selling a subscription service, software subscription service, it might be subscribers per month. Okay, or in this case, subscribers per year, because it's an annual projection. So the drivers are whatever is the key indicator that's driving revenue. Revenue is just what you sold. What money are you collecting from what you've sold? Yeah, thank you. Amortization, thank you. So, so you need to cue in on the drivers that are driving revenue, which are your sales. Okay, and again, it could be sales, it could be leases, it could be subscriptions, whatever your revenue model is. Expenses are all of your expenses. Okay, now in this slide, expenses are all lumped together. Sometimes you'll see expenses broken out into cost of goods sold, the actual cost to produce the product, and then other general expenses, which are things like salaries and marketing and utilities and rent, okay, things like that. And I'll show you some other examples of that. All right. In the notes here, it says be ready to answer things like, if you received funding, the funding you received, could you scale faster? All right. If somebody was going to throw more money at your business, what would you do with it? How would you grow it? All right. Another key concept, and again, we're going to get into this much more deeper in that other workshop. Another thing you want to think about is, where do you break even? And the break even concept is that you're going to be selling enough to cover all of your expenses. And at that point, you're not making money, but you're not losing money. So that really tells you this is the minimum in sales that I need to do, the minimum in revenue I need to do at that level in order to just be able to operate, not making money or losing money. And what investors want to know there is, how quickly do you reach your break-even point? All right? Investors they expect you to lose money in the first year, maybe even into the middle of the second year, depending upon the product or service you're offering, maybe even into the third year. But at some point, they are going to expect you to break even and then start making money. Okay, and you, as the head of this venture, you need to know, when is that break-even point? And that's a question that an investor might pop on you at any point in time. You got to be able to answer that. All right, let's move on. So here's an example of another slide. All right, you know, here the whole point of this is, hey, our outlook looks awesome. Okay, look at our numbers. We're going from 1,000 employees to 10,000, 45 to 120,000. Look at our revenues. You know, well, okay. There's some problems with this slide, and so I want to highlight them to you. Number one is, if you look at the second column, 2019, and you look at your costs, an investor does not care that your costs are $2,398,738. The fact that you are showing 7 digits implies that there's some level of precision there that doesn't exist. And the reason is because this is a projection. You don't know that you're going to have exactly that cost. You could have just as well said, our projected costs are $2.4 million. That's good enough. And so this is what I consider to be kind of a rookie mistake, okay? When you present your numbers like this, an investor looks at this and says, yep, this person knows nothing about presenting to an investor. They don't know how to present their numbers, and they immediately start discounting the quality of the information. Now, you may have really high quality data here. You may have crunched these numbers 6 ways from Sunday, but if you present it like this, you're telling them that these numbers are just numbers, right? So there's other ways to show it, other formats. This is a little better format, right? So we're still talking millions of dollars, but hey, we've shown over here that it's this number, this number under column 2022 is 8,659,000, right? But that's 8.659 million in reality, okay? And even then, that's probably too much precision. It could have just been 8.6 million, and that would have been good enough. Notice down here, in addition to the projections, and again, you only want to show 3 years, but in addition to the projections, notice this box underneath here. It says total EBITDA by 2022, $44 million. So here they're saying, not only is this our flow, but by the end of 2022, we will have achieved $44 million in total EBITDA, which is a return of 20% equity, $9.9 million. So they're giving some other key pieces of information that an investor might want to zero in on. And rather than making the investor do the mental math, they were figuring out the mental math, and then they were putting it there, making it easy for the investor to see that. All right. Another version of this slide, again, here they're showing the years, and they're showing the driver is the number of widgets. Widgets is a term people use for product sales. So, you know, they're selling 38 or 150 or 250. That's what's driving this revenue number. All right. Here you see that they've got cost of sales split out differently from other expenses, which are SG&A, sales, general, and administrative expenses. Notice down here under the CapEx number, they're also highlighting that they're going to need capital expense. They're going to need dollars to buy equipment, capital investment into the business to be able to generate that revenue. All right. So there's lots of different ways. Again, there's no one set way to show your numbers. You're going to want to show them the way that makes it the best story for you. All right. And you have to think about what are the things that the investors are going to want to zero in on. And again, I can help you with that. Other mentors can help you with that. I also wanted to show you back on this slide. So here's unit sales. Okay. But then notice they have revenue broken out into devices and software. So they're saying, hey, we have 2 different revenue streams. And that's important because revenue from devices means you're selling hard product, and hard product has related costs. Software, typically costs are pretty small because once you've developed the software, hosting it and offering it, you know, is pretty cheap. And so profit margins on software are a lot better than profit margins on products. All right. And so this person, when they were presenting this data, were trying to show that. So again, just different elements about how you're going to want to show your financials. I've talked about revenue models already. Just so how are you going to make money? Is it a subscription model? You know, are you going to start with small businesses and then you're going to move into growing retailers, and then you're going to go and start offering it at the enterprise level, you know, and what that revenue model might look like for each of those target segments. All right. Milestones. One of the things you want to talk about in your pitch is any major milestones that you've achieved or are planning to achieve. Okay. It could be either or. And also, if you can, you want to tie for these milestones. If it's going to take $20,000 or $50,000 of investment to hit that milestone, you might want to note that on your slide as well. All right. This can be shown as a timeline. It can be shown as a Gantt chart. Again, there are a lot of different ways to show milestones. And I'll show you an example. So this was a slide that somebody used to show their milestones over a period of time. And here's what the milestones were. Okay, so we're going to achieve our alpha prototype by March of 2017. These are the things that are going to be as part of that alpha prototype. And then we're going to go into full development after we've done the prototype and gotten feedback. And then these are the things that will be in the full product development by this date. And then approvals and pilots. And then we're launching in 2019. Okay. Anybody want to make a comment about what's missing from this chart? Anything you think that you'd rather have added to this chart?
I can take a stab. Maybe like how do you plan on launching it?
Okay, yeah, so under launch, right? I mean, launch, but they could have added bullets up above that said, and this is what we're going to do at launch. That's one thing they could have done. Anybody else?
I'm a little confused by what the bars represent. Like, it feels like it's trying to say like, oh, we're going to do this much work here, but then the launch one's really tiny.
Well, okay, so the bars are representing time periods. So the first bar is by March 2017, we will do these things, or we will have these things done by March of 2017. That's all that means, is that's what that bar is. These are the things we plan to have done. The second bar is we plan to have full development of the product, which will have all of these things in it by December of 2017. Once we have the full development done, then we're going to go out, and by 2018, we're going to get approvals and we're going to pilot the product. We're going to get class 2 device approval. We're going to get 510K clearance. This was a medical device, by the way. We're going to do vendor audits. We're going to do our pilot program. That's all that indicates, okay, for each of those. Now, the launch was just, and guess what? And by 2019, we are going to launch. But as you know, as the other person just commented, there's more they could have said there. So here's what I would say what's deficient with this, and it's actually right at the very top. Isn't this very product focused? This is all about developing the product. But when you're launching a company, it's not just about the product you're developing, right? Don't you have to do a whole bunch of other things? And wouldn't an investor want to know how you're doing with all of those other things? So for example, on the next slide, okay, this is a milestone chart. Again, bars and things to be accomplished, but this is more of a company focus. So if you notice in here, there are a couple things that are very product focused, okay? But there are also things on here that have nothing to do with product, okay, or not product focused. So, you know, in the first bar, the first column, they have scheduled 2 pilots. They have their MVP, their minimum viable product build out. They're going to do that. But guess what? They're going to launch their brand strategy. That doesn't have anything to do with the product. That's marketing. Okay. They're going to raise $150,000. Doesn't have anything to do with product. Doesn't have anything to do with marketing. That has to do with funding your business, right? Raising investment, building equity. So it gives a better, more holistic perspective to an investor. You're not micro-focused on developing the product, okay? You're focused on the whole business, and you're showing them that you recognize that there's more important things than just getting that product developed, all right? So I like to stress that when you're thinking about milestones, go beyond the product. Don't be so product focused in getting it developed that you ignore things like, hey, we're going to get our first revenue in Q3 2018. That's a huge milestone. If you can tell an investor that we're going to start having money coming in the door Q3 2018, you want to be sharing that with them, right? And then if you want to let them know that, oh, by the way, we know that even though we have money coming in the door with our plan, we're going to have to start raising another $1.5 million in Q4 of 2018. That's important to tell them too. So this slide shows a whole bunch of different milestones. Some are marketing, some are revenue, some are fundraising, some are product development. And that, I think, is the preferred way to go because it gives a more holistic perspective on the business. All right, so we're getting to the end. Funding and uses. One of the last slides that some people choose to show, but you don't have to, is actually funding and usage you really kind of do have to show. I take that back. It's the next one that I got confused. So funding and usage, you want to show this, and that's if you've received investment in your company already, you want to say that. So like if you've put $5,000 from your checking account in, or your uncle, your favorite uncle's giving you $10,000 to put into your company to get it launched, you're going to want to show, I've already received $10,000 from friends and family. I've put $5,000 in. Currently, I need $50,000, $100,000 to get my business launched or to get my product developed or whatever it is, okay? And then you need to tell us how you're planning to use that money, okay? So all of these bullets, how much have you raised, when did you raise it, and from whom? Show founders' investment. So if you've put money in, that's called skin in the game. Investors like to know that you have some skin in the game. All right, makes them feel better about putting their money in if they know you've got money in it too. All right, list current and future asks. So how much do you need now, and how much do you think you're going to need in the near future? How will those funds be used? You do not want to list a shopping list of 20 items. And again, think about what I was saying on that financial investment slide, or I'm sorry, the financial projection slide. You don't want to be saying we're going to be spending $2,528 on our marketing. You want to say we're going to spend $2,000 on our marketing. We're going to spend $6,000 on, establishing partnerships. We're going to spend $10,000 on technology, $4,000 on a lease. Summarize and round all your numbers. Again, it's a real tell if you're getting into the details. It's a rookie mistake. Okay, how are you going to use it? Okay, we're going to use it for medical devices. We're going to use it for clinical trials. We're going to use it for these milestones. So if I go backwards, some of these milestones, right, you could actually even put in here, like if you're planning to raise this $150,000 for these subsequent milestones, you could have put in parentheses the dollars, how much of that $150,000 were you planning to use towards that milestone? All right. Okay, just trying to share some ideas. And if you really don't think you need outside funding, some people are launching modest businesses. They don't need a whole lot of funding, or they don't want outside investors because they want to own the company. They want to own as much as the equity in the company as possible. They don't want to share equity, okay? And when you take outside investment, immediately you've given up part of your company, and you may not want to do that. And so you might want to just say, hey, I'm asking for $60,000. And the reason I suggest that number is because if you win the grand prize, you'll get $60,000, $20,000 for being first place in your track, and $40,000 for the grand prize. So why not say you won all $60,000 and here's how you're going to spend it? All right. Many of you will ask for more, and that's fine, but then you're going to need to spell out how you're using it. So this is an example of a slide somebody did. They were asking for $500,000. Okay, they were saying they wanted it in the form of a convertible note, which is a form of funding. They had an 18-month runway, which means that $500,000 was going to last them 18 months. And at the end of 18 months, they were expecting they were going to need another $5 to $7 million to keep the business going. Now, how are they going to spend that $500,000? Well, here were the key elements. They're going to spend $70K for manufacturing, $30 for a pilot study, $100 for FDA testing. Okay, big numbers, rounded numbers, and several bullets. They could have gotten much more specific and detailed, and they probably had a list that was much longer, but they summarized it just to try to express the big ones. All right. This is the slide that's optional, your exit strategy slide. So one thing, and again, this is a common rookie mistake, will be when you ask somebody, are you planning to take investment into your company? Do you need investment to help you get launched? And they're, oh yeah, I want investment. Great. And then you say to them, what do you see as your exit strategy? And they'll say, I don't have an exit strategy. What do you mean? I'm not going to get rid of my business. I want to keep my business. I want to run this business for the next 10 years. I'm never selling this business. So that's a rookie mistake. And that's a tell to an investor that you don't understand the process. Again, as soon as you take money into a company from an investor, they need some way of getting that investment back. Investors are looking for 10, 20, 30 times their investment. And I hear people say, well, I'm going to pay them back out of the profits. You can't make enough money fast enough to pay them back what they expect out of your profits. It's not possible. And you can, argue that with me if you'd like, but I will tell you the vast majority of people, they cannot do it. It's just not possible. So if you're going to take an outside investment, think about, how does that investor cash out? Which means, how are you going to sell this company? You need to sell it on to somebody else in order to get enough of a profit that you can pay that investor back. So an angel investor is going to expect 5 to 10 times return on their money. If they put $50,000 in, they want $250,000 to $500,000 back. If you get 4 or 5 angel investors, you're talking a couple $1 million. And that's to give them back, not including still having cash in the company. So think about what an exit strategy might be. You can exit by selling the company, but still being part of the company. All right. You may not be the CEO anymore. By the way, you may not want to be the CEO anymore, but you may want to still be part of that company. And the people who buy it out may want to keep you as part of that company. And that's perfectly fine. But don't get it in your head that I'm going to take outside investment. I'm going to build this company for the next 10 years, because no investor is going to wait 10 years to get their money back. They're going to want you to sell this company in 3 to 5 years, 7 at the outside. Okay. So I've been talking, I didn't go through all of these bullets, but I'm trying to just cover this. And your exit strategy would be things like, you're either going to be acquired by a competitor, by another market leader, another key role or key player in the industry, but who isn't necessarily competing with you, or maybe you're going to do an IPO. But again, IPOs are not common. I've been through an IPO personally, and they're hard and painful, and not all of them are successful. Not everybody's a Facebook. So you need to really think through how you want to position this. So here's some examples of how you might do that. You might say, we're looking for significant investment, but you know what? We've looked at other acquisition activity in our space, in our industry. We've seen that Stamps.com just acquired ShipStation. Magento just acquired RJ Metrics. Ingram Micro just acquired Shipwire. And each of these are in industries, and our business is similar to our business, and look at the valuations they've got. Believe me, if you come up with an idea and a venture, and in 3 to 5 years, you can sell it for 75 to or 35 million to $80 million, you're doing good, right? You're going to make a lot of money, and your investors are going to make a lot of money. And that's all they care about, is how are they going to make money? So that's a slide, that's an example of a acquisition activity. Here's another one, similar. They said, hey, look at the different valuations for different companies. that had been acquired or who have been acquiring in this space. You know, you want to use recognizable brand names. You want to try to find valuations when you can. But a lot of these acquisitions are private, and it's hard to find out what they sold for. It's not always public information. But if you can develop an exit strategy and show your investor, we know we're going to need to exit in 3 to 5 years. This is, you know, these are the kinds of companies we're thinking we could be sold to. And you can make kind of a believable story. You can paint a picture for the investor that gets them seeing that this is possible. That's great. That's what you want to look for. That's what you want to try to accomplish. All right. Finally, your last slide is going to be your summary slide. You're going to want to have your company name on it. Your contact information should be on there, your website URL, or if you have a blog page or anything that helps to drive home who you are and what you're about, okay? What's your big value proposition, to go back to an earlier comment, all right? So that's it for tonight. I have a bunch of other slides. This is an example of a slide, a closing slide of a presentation. But I have a bunch of other slides, but I know I've gone long. I thank you all for hanging in here. I can only assume you either fell asleep or you found this interesting and helpful. I hope it was the latter. Any other questions that you may have? I'll stay on as long as you want to stay on.
Yes, hello, I'm Regina, and the question I have is so what if your service is not like more so focused on,
Keep going.
like, can you hear me? I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Keep going. I just wanted to put this up so people could see it.
Okay, so what if your service is more focused on like a nonprofit section? Is that like something you can still focus on?
Well, first of all, you can be a for-profit business. You can be a B Corp. You can be a social impact venture, but you have to be a for-profit social impact venture, okay? You cannot compete in the BYOBB if you're a not-for-profit venture. All right, the innovative idea competition, you can participate in that. You could participate in the Changemaker Challenge as a not-for-profit. But what I would encourage you to do is think about how you could generate revenue for your business. There's nothing wrong with having a social impact venture that generates revenue, right? That's how you become self-sustainable. And if you're stuck and you'd like to talk about that, book some time with me. I'd be happy to try to help you uncover some ways that you could make revenue, you know, and do that. So I hope that answered your question. Lindsay, do you have a slide for FLDP points?
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Yes, I wanted to know, so to be in the BYOBB competition, do we have to have an exit strategy? Like, is that like mandatory for us?
No, not at all. If you have a business idea and you're passionate about it and you love it, and let's say you want this to become your family business, right? You want to build this business, grow this business, you want to pass it down to your kids or to your nephews or nieces, that's fine. You do not have to have an exit strategy. But what I will caution you on is that if you are planning to take outside investment, then you should think about an exit strategy, okay? Even if you don't share it, you should think about it, because you will have to have one. Because before an investor is going to write you a check, they're going to want to know, how are they going to get their money back? And the only way you'll get your money back is through an exit strategy.
Thank you.
No, they can't see the, I don't think they can see the suitable slide. Now they can see the suitable slide. All right. Other questions?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm currently working on this thing entirely by myself. Do you think it would look better if I have someone with me to work on it? Should that be something that I'm looking for? Or is it fine just to be doing it on your own and working hard on it?
Matthew, it's totally fine being on your own. All right. I'm not gonna, the worst thing that could happen would be for you to go find a partner, just to find a partner, just to make the slide look good. Don't do that, because bringing a partner into a startup is a little bit like getting married. It's easy to do it, but it's really hard to break it off. So it's like getting divorced. Okay. Once you bring a partner in, you're going to be sharing some equity with them. And even if you decide they're a horrible partner, I want to get rid of you, you're out. Guess what? They still own part of your company. And all of the success that you might have after you've kicked them out, they're going to benefit from for doing nothing, right? So don't add somebody to your team just for the sake of adding them to your team. However, you know, the most successful entrepreneurs are people who do a little bit of self-introspection, right? They're going to look at themselves. They're going to do an assessment and say, hey, what am I good at? What am I not good at? And if I'm not good at these things, I need to bring a partner in who is good at those things, because it helps to round out the team. You know, investors don't like putting a lot of money into solopreneurs, you know, solopreneurships, because if you step off the curb and God forbid you get hit by a bus, there goes the company. So do you have to have a partner for the competition? No. I would say do the self-assessment, and if you can't find anybody to add, you might want to have your management team slide and put your picture and you're the CEO, and then put 2 question marks and say, I'm looking for a CTO, I'm looking for a CFO. And because at least it demonstrates to the judges, to the investors, that you get it, that you know you need help.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
Yes, I had a question about the slide you just put up that had like undergrad and then graduate. What was that kiosk code for?
So that QR code was for suitable points in the suitable system at Fox.
Oh, okay.
If you're not a Fox student, you don't need to worry about it.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. I think Temple is planning to roll out suitable points across the entire university next year. So maybe next year you'll need it. Yeah, Matthew?
What do you think's like the #1 thing that the people participating in this need help on, and where can we find help for that thing?
Wow. I would say probably most people are, I don't know if they need help, but most people are the most uncomfortable doing the financials. Okay. You know, if you don't know anything about business, if you're not a business major, you know, a P&L and an income statement are like a foreign language, and how it's structured and how to prepare one. And there's tons of material online, really good material online that you can read. And we'll be sharing some of that in that shared resources folder with you that will help you understand it. But that's why we do one whole workshop on financials. And that's why we have all of these great mentors who can help you think through the financials. Related to the financials, the other tip I would give to all of you who stayed on the call is that the most important thing about your financials isn't necessarily the numbers, it's the assumptions. So when you submit this spreadsheet that has the 3 years of numbers, you're going to also submit with it your list of all your assumptions. And the assumptions are the magic. The assumptions are what explains the numbers. So if you just give me an Excel spreadsheet with all these numbers in it, and there's no assumptions that help explain it, anybody can make up numbers, right? I don't even know how you got to those numbers. They might look awesome, but if I'm a judge and you're just throwing a bunch of numbers at me, I go, wow, these numbers look great, but how did you get to these numbers? And if you don't explain that to me in the assumptions, I'm scoring off points left and right. So it's the numbers are important, but to me, the assumptions behind those numbers that explain why and why then and why that much, that's what's the magic, okay? So I would share that with you. The other thing I would say is I've been doing this since 2009 as a mentor, and I've heard all kinds of questions in every area. I think financials is the most difficult area, but some people just have a really hard time with the go-to-market strategy. They don't understand that whole concept of how I'm going to get that product out. Another concept I think a lot of people struggle with is they have an idea for an app or a website or some kind of software, and all they want to talk about is, how do I find a developer to build it for me? And how much is it going to cost? And I'll say to them, why would you build something before you know anybody even wants to buy it? And by the way, how would you even know what to build if you haven't talked to people to find out what they want? And so I think another pitfall is people fall into this trap of thinking that they've got to, build this product or develop this product and pour $10,000, $20,000 into their software right up front, or they won't have anything to show the judges. I know a lot of winners who had software products and they hadn't written one line of code, but they won the competition because they knew how to explain the concept. And back to the word that I said I loved way in the beginning, they were able to show traction. So again, I'll dig deeper into this on another workshop, but the highest level of traction is you have paying customers. That proves to an investor people are willing to pay for what value you're offering, right? That's awesome. Most of you don't have that, right? And so, well, what's the next best thing? Oh, I've got a beta test. I've got a signed agreement with the customer to do a beta test. Or I've got 3 customers who've signed up to do an alpha test. Or I've got a website and I've got 1,000 people who've put in their names and their email addresses saying, contact me when the product is available. So what I'm doing is I'm going from the very top level of traction and I'm working my way down to the lower levels of traction. But being able to show an investor that you have people already interested in learning more or in signing up when it's releasable is traction. And I'll give you a quick example of that is Dropbox. So if any of you are familiar with the company Dropbox, right? Cloud sharing, right? One of the companies that pioneered that, but they didn't invent it. They went out, they created a website. They had 30,000 people sign up for their service. They did not write one line of code, but they took that 30,000 list, people of 30,000, or that list of 30,000 people, and when they went out to do their investor pitches, they were showing these prospective investors, hey, we have this great concept. It solves this problem for these people. We know that because here's the 30,000 people that have already signed up for it. And the investors were like, how do I get in on this? It's how do I sign up? Because if you can show you've already got that many people interested in a product you haven't even built yet, people get excited about that. All right. So you want to think about what kinds of traction can you show based off of wherever you are in this process of rolling out your concept and rolling out your venture. Again, that's something I can help you with. Our other mentors can help, talk you through that. So I hope did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that answered my question. What you're saying is that the financials is and the product is a little bit more important than like just actually developing the thing for the pitch. Does that sound?
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is you don't have to develop the product. You know, if you have a product, if you have a prototype, you can hold it up and show it, you know, hand it to the judges if we're in person, because we don't know if we're going to be in person yet or not. Yeah, that's powerful. Okay. I always encourage teams, if you have something, even if you have a mock-up, it may not work. Okay. I actually had students that developed just a wireframe of what the app would look like. Didn't work. You press the buttons, nothing worked, right? But they were able to hand it to the judge and say, here's my mock-up. And they looked at it and they went, oh, yeah, pretty slick, you know? Something's better than nothing. People that have little prototypes built out of, you know, Legos even, you know, anything that helps to get the concept across. But the most important thing is being able to demonstrate some kind of traction as opposed to, oh, I have working software over here, okay? Other questions? All right.
I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Are we going to have a recording? Are we able to have?
Yes.
Yeah, so the recordings will be posted by, I would say, Friday lunchtime at the latest, and they're going to be, the IEI has our own YouTube channel. Give me 1 second, I'll put it in the link, youtube.com.
Okay, thank you. I was a little late, so I missed the early part.
It is no problem. I don't know that I even said this specifically. So that's the link to our YouTube channel. They'll be posted there every Friday by lunch. We'll also, as soon as it's on, we'll also send a follow-up email to everyone that registered and attended with the YouTube link to tonight's recording. And reminders will be in kind of those weekly emails as well, like missed last week's workshop, watch it here. So as long as you're on our email list, if you've registered for the competition, if you've registered for any of these workshops, attended any of these workshops, you'll get a weekly email from us now with reminders for all the weekly workshops. And yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Pitch decks will be in the shared, like Greg's presentation from tonight will be PDF'd and in that shared resource folder as well. So again, using that intent to submit registration form is incredibly important, because that is where A, you sign up for a mentor, huge, and B, you get access to all the templates, extra free resources, articles, video links, the slide decks from all of the workshops. And if you did not attend last week's How I Won the BYOBB Boss Bowl, we had last year's grand prize winner and an undergraduate and a graduate. I think they were second and third place in their tracks. Join us for that event, and they gave some super good advice on competing and just starting a business in general. And so that recording is also on our YouTube channel. And we'll have a story about that, kind of focusing on those little nuggets of wisdom that should be out next week.